in a while. That's in continuation to the discussion which has been ongoing for a while. I'm just logging into the system. So putting myself on mute. If you have any questions, put your questions in the chat box and we'll look into it if we can address those today. And here we go. So particularly the standpoint view is to understand technology mining, and then we will walk through the other things which are important in terms of the design aspect to understand how design thinking can be put into practice for the architectural framework of different protocols, and particularly understanding the protocols and deploying it way ahead in terms of the curve. And on the timeline, if we have to look into the timeline, which are important today, obviously one is the just give me a moment. One is the timeline of 7th of November 2025. However, we are going back to the timeline of 1977. We will look into the data sets of the events of 7th of October 1977 and look into the aspect of the events, particularly in the year 2008, and particularly considering the months from August to December, and then develop the protocol around it for the technology mining. Particularly, we were looking into the data tags and the others, and perhaps I have some smart contracts which I want to walk through today so that that can be utilized for creating the protocols for the input data sets from the understanding of the core parameters, where we are looking at 999 parameters, and those are the essential parameters. It's not at least one or at least 999. We are looking at solid 999 parameters which are scored based on different factors, and which is a combination definitely of historical data set, environmental data set, and the others. And the others can be, I'm not getting into it, but hopefully folks who are developing their own protocols in terms of the alignment with Khastgir algorithm can look into it. And coding is not a we are not living in a time where we need to learn that from the scratch. That's the easy route to do it. What is important right now is to appreciate the codes in terms of the protocols, and particularly appreciating the new world order, which is very important right now. Putting myself on mute, and then we'll start in a while. Okay, first of all, we are going to look into particularly understand the landscape in terms of how to mitigate, in terms of the SWOT analysis, and understand the nuance of combating the disasters utilizing the Khastgir algorithm, which perhaps is very useful in terms of the use case studies. And few of the use case studies are with the regulators in some way or the other. The cognizance here is how we can utilize it to obviate or prepare for any natural disaster which is incoming. Because if something cannot be mitigated, it cannot be obviated also. But something which cannot be obviated, it can be mitigated with the coding and the quantum world. In terms of, we talked about the online life, offline life, the quantum world, which is 75% of the way things are, if we have to agree to that. And today, the pain point here is we need to resolve something. I'm not talking about what we are trying to resolve, but that is a event which has already occurred, and it is something to do with the space. We'll try to mitigate it the way we can, and let's see if that works out in next 24 hours. I'm not telling the event per se, but folks who are intelligent enough would be able to appreciate, and we would code around it and try and mitigate it the way we can in terms of the disaster which has already happened. Because disasters happen when there is fiction, and when there is fiction, there are a couple of things which can be utilized, particularly with the coding. But the point is what to code. That is where the real intelligence comes into picture. Okay, so first of all, we'll talk about the tagging part. And here we are looking at the letter E. E here stands for Enigma, but the tagging is E21F17/00. This is particularly utilization of the processes, the handheld devices for the utilization in the mines or the tunnels, which are not disclosed anywhere, but tunnel and mines can be something which is not legible to the naked eye, perhaps because of some calamity in the historical data set. It is still undiscovered. Then the other one is adaptation of signaling or alarming handle devices. That is E21F17/18. Okay, so what are we doing here? So this is a protocol of monitoring a system for resolving the impact of the pressure on disaster by utilizing structural control. So the understanding here is to have the flow charts and the flow diagrams around SC. So here SC stands for, I'll just write it down. So in future, anybody who would be coding this in the best way possible to achieve SGD 2030, it can be utilized. That is structural control for SGD 2030. I need to ping few folks. Let me do that. Okay, so how to go about acquiring the input data? That's very important from the protocol standpoint of view. And particularly, we are looking to input the right data set. There is no ounce of doubt in terms of taking the consent of the candidate first. Because to solve the smart contracts, there has to be intervention. And the intervention has to come from individuals who have the intellect as something which is tangible. So, if we look into that impact, what is important here is to understand the acquisition, how the data is acquired at the first step itself. So, here the data is acquired by what we are tagging as the identification data, which is also called as acquiring the identification data from a structure which can be unorganized and organized. Now, it's a very interesting word. The word organized and unorganized is very well written in most of the barracks in India in terms of the understanding of how businesses are run in this country. And particularly, I'm talking from the standpoint view of India in terms of what is organized and unorganized. That being said, the next very important factor here is to understand the understanding of what are we utilizing that data for. In one of the event or hypothesis, it would be to gather the knowledge in a 3D graphic way. What is important here is to understand that the output of the same would be dependent on multiple applications. Now, say for example, uh, we talk about a disaster here, and the disaster can be in terms of an earthquake. There's some kind of earthquake, seismic is happening at any given point of time on the planet because of so much unrest and the entropy is increasing. Make faces in the mirror. I don't understand why this automated stuff of YouTube is asking. Okay, next. So what we are trying to do here is to utilize the data set and try and run different simulations as for the planning in terms of what the input has to be. And then there is a determination box as to understand the structural regulation method around the same in terms of the protocols, and particularly the protocols in terms of, I would be discussing some of the protocols. Let's see how much deep dive we go today. Then we have understanding the toolbox, which is particularly looking at different preset, I would say, input data sets, which is useful enough to understand the emergency in present and take precautions to mitigate the emergency in the best possible manner with the best possible resources at hand. So that is done. Then what are we doing next is okay, the monitoring data, how the monitoring data is selected. It is basically deployment of different sensors which are configured to take different parameters which are available at any given point of time. And with the, I won't say the advent is not the right word, with the available sensors in place, which are a lot in numbers, deploying that, take those data sets, and then have your simulations ready to put it into a smart contract, see the execution in a control set, and let it be in a loop so that that loop is able to take care of the input data set at the first place. So that is point number one. This is done. Next. I like this one. Okay, Now we will deep dive into the understanding of the phrase technology mining. It is a important phase, phrase, tagline, whatever the suitable dialect of the folks who like to tag same thing in their own sweet language. So that is technology mining. So, what is the technology mining talking about? So, the ontology is under the tagging of G06F16 slash 367. Semantic analysis, we already did it earlier also, but I'll reiterate here. G06F 40 slash 30. For the quality analysis and the management, we have G06Q10 slash 06395. Now for the neural stuff, we have name entity recognition, G06F40 slash 295. Then we have for the chunking and the state techniques, utilization of G06F40 slash 289. For context free grammar and unification grammar, oh my gosh, it's so important given the fact. I mean, I can talk about, I shouldn't be talking about one particular country, but the same word is written by different people under different dialect. E is replaced with double I is replaced with double E. So the teaching method of English itself has been, it is a joke. I mean, it is literally a joke in terms of the understanding of the language, because with the wrong dialect, when you're using it as an input data, whatever coding you are doing, that is not going to suffice the purpose, because at the back end, the core of the language is something which shouldn't be changed at the first place. So this is not that you use your astro understanding and put double A, double I, double P and whatnot people do just to get the astro stuff into picture, because that's not how the Intel has to work in terms of the protocols, which are the core protocols. Of course, at the periphery, which is not even part of the main protocols, do whatever you wish to. Nobody is stopping anyone. But when we're talking about technology mining, it is particularly important to appreciate what can be done in terms of the quality program which is being resolved for a product, wherein the steps itself is first receiving a relevant problem data of, say for example, there is a system, HACCP system per se, which is in the hospitality industry. HACCP we already discussed earlier, but just for the reiteration, it is hazard analysis critical control points, and there are some human intervention folks who are there just to create that problem statement. So those are the system errors in terms of the human intervention which needs to be chucked out, at least from that protocol. They can live their own protocols. Nobody is stopping to be lived in terms of the protocols. But when there's a problem solving statement, it has to be carried in association with the processing of the right nodes. Right nodes should be in synchronicity. That is more important for the protocols to work, particularly from the 6G use case study standpoint. Okay, we did this. Big data. Okay, let's deep dive into big data also, but I'll just do that in a moment. I want to complete this technology mining the way I wanted to, but I think today is just the day one of the technology mining. It will be particularly, I'm thinking at least for next 10-15 days, we'll be putting emphasis on the technology mining part, because that is very important from the standpoint view of creating the protocols for the businesses to run. And when we talk about businesses, let's take the H businesses. Hospitality is nothing to do with hospitals. I don't know why people confuse themselves hospitality with hospitals. That is healthcare. So that is different aspects. So there are two aspects. One is hospitality, another is healthcare. At the intersection are the engineers, who are the, I would say, the structural framework of solving the massive problems. I think that's a good way to put that. Okay, let's understand this part, which is interesting. I mean, technology mining is very it's a topic of discussion, and it has loads of layers, and it is something which will intrigue you, it will mesmerize you, it will question the status quo, because that is what is important right now, is to identify the status quo and work around it and get things done in a fast, speedy manner. Okay, so first of all, we have here I'm not getting into the age-old systems. We'll talk about the uh, okay, right now how data is collected at the primary research. That is very important aspect, and why it is important, because that data itself gives you a picture of the reality of the offline world, because the reality of the offline world can be mimicked in the online world, and with the quantum stuff a lot can be built around it in the new world order, and that is fascinating. I mean, that is where I think the mojo lies in terms of uh, it's already there in silos. It's just that it has to be done in a big format, because folks really need to see that what it can actually bring in terms of futures today. So that is already being developed and working in IPR for the longest time, more than 2 decades now. I think we should be launching it as soon as possible. Okay, so let's get back to this understanding. Mm, duh, duh, duh. Okay, I'm trying to not use the jargon words, but if I have to talk about it, we need to understand the environmental sensor stuff in terms of understanding how nature is the biggest blockchain, because folks really don't have any understanding. Say, for example, I talk about Fibonacci series. You would see Fibonacci series everywhere, on a butterfly, on the leaves, or, all these basic botany. And botany has nothing to do with the dialogue delivery. Botany is really to get deep dive into the photosynthesis, how the sun is being, how the sun is being grasped by that particular living being and transferred into something which is creating the entity which is important for the living system to thrive. Okay, that being said, the next would be, this seems to be a jargon. Let me neutralize it. Okay. So, when we're talking about generating stuff modules, we can have a preface such as knowledge, because knowledge is not prime per se, but knowledge is good enough to have a very positive module around the data set, and that input data set itself can be life changing for even the hospitality sector and the healthcare sector. So we need to identify, okay, if I have to just give consensus on the discussion which we are having right now, would be the consensus between what is common between the hospitality industry and the healthcare industry. And there are intersections where the similar, I would say, similar structure of the data set in terms of the BAS, the PAS, the SAS models can be deployed. So that is something we can look into right now. Okay.
That is standard was about 16 lakh 500 something was the amount that we have